So thank you for joining us today. First of all, I really just want to appreciate you for being such great members of our community and attending our alumni town hall. And this session is around making school leadership pipelines more diverse. We'll go to the next slide. All right, so today what we're going to have a conversation and we're going to ask you for your feedback is an overview of the 5 actions that district leaders can take to increase school leader diversity, exploration of promising practices in districts across the nation, and identification of immediate next steps in diversifying talent pipelines. So, and new leaders, we always want you to leave with some next steps. So we'll talk about those opportunities. So we would love to hear from you all. What is your pain point of finding leaders or teachers of color? So if you just scan this code, you'll be able to go into a poll everywhere and then just jot in what are some of the pain points that occur in trying to find like leaders and teachers of color. What do you think causes the issues? I think we had it so embedded. Data, I don't think we actually have a link for it.
No worries.
But you could drop in the chat what you're thinking or the words that you want to share, because we're just going to popcorn out and just like reflect on it before we go into the conversation. So it's okay. All right, we're going to go to the next slide and see the results of like some words that you guys are thinking about. So here are some of the words that you probably are thinking, like the pool is not deep, right? It's a lot of competition that you might have to, like, there's multiple districts or pay. Credentialing might be an issue that was shared. There's the pool is small and fighting. There might be other barriers that are impacting. Having teachers that are bilingual is so important. When we think about the diversity in America, it's just not just like Spanish. We think about so many different languages that we get to serve. Retention might be an issue. So once you get them, sometimes they leave. And so there are a variety of reasons why there might be pain points for finding leaders and teachers of color. So we're going to kind of talk about that. Does anybody want to just lift for the group, like why finding teachers of color might be very difficult and what your thoughts are about that, the reasons behind that?
I think in general, just overall, young people do not seem to be excited about being educators. When we were coming up, I think we were probably part of the crew that wanted to be teachers and wanted to be educators all of our lives. I know that's my personal story. And then a lot of young people right now, they don't see it as being a profession that they want to be a part of for whatever reason, right? It might be because of their own school experience, unfortunately.
Oh, so I think this piece around like, is it like a quote unquote like sexy profession, right? Like, is it what we hear everyone around the country is talking about? Like normally you hear things about like STEM, right? Getting kids into STEM programming, STEM careers, but you don't really hear that same push around like, yeah, let's get into education. And especially people of color. So I think that is a big part around like from a young age, people are not thinking like, what are my steps to become a teacher? And so they're not even thinking about education, then we are struggling to get them into the profession. So let's talk quickly through some of the suggestions based on the work that New Leaders has done and research around like what are some ways. So one is to create a leadership pathway for career mobility. So on the next slide. So Tracy Frazier said, new leaders does a great job of teaching our participants to be instructional leaders. Our partnership is critical for our pipeline. It's not just around thinking about like what is the programming that people are in to create this pipeline, but it's actually what is the programming that's going to make them feel successful to be able to do the job. And so one of the things that we have read in our research is that when people feel prepared into whatever role it is, they want to do it. When they don't think they had the training or don't think they're prepared, guess what they do? Either they don't stay in the profession or they don't even go into it. And so as leaders in your districts, you want to think about like, how are we creating the right pipeline and making sure that people feel confident that they can do the job, because when they feel great that they know how to do it, they will actually be in it. So not only just having the pipeline, right? Saying, oh, we have different type of programming. You want to actually make sure that you have the right programming that really fortifies their beliefs and knowledge and skills to be successful. And so that is our first action around creating a pipeline. We also talked through that strong leadership is instrumental to achieving our goal, and knowing that students that are underserved normally don't have people that look like them. And so that is why the diversity component is so important. So when they see that woman or man, or even like a trans person stand in front of them, they can then make that connection. And so when we're thinking about our pipelines, we want to make sure that those pipelines are diverse, especially for underserved communities, and it looks like them. And so that our kids, when they're like looking up to their leaders, they can say, I see a leader just like me. And we all know the research that has happened around teachers that are represented by the students, that they do fare better just because they feel that connection to that teacher. And that holds true for also school leaders. So one of the things that we just have listed here are things that we think make sense for career mobility. One, ensure your aspiring leaders are job ready. Again, as I noted earlier, making sure that the program sets them up for success. We hate to see data points that says, oh, we got them into the program, but they were not successful, right? And so you want to make sure that you identify in your pipeline development program, what are the key issues that these leaders might have, and how are we making sure to prepare them and make them job ready? Establish partnerships with providers that demonstrate a commitment to a strong track record, and prepares a diverse cohort of educators. So you want to make sure that you have that. And think about creating your own, grow your own programs. And so that takes a lot of work. But if people feel like they see themselves growing within their organization, they do not want to leave, right? They started here, they built relationships, they know the kids, they know the families, they know the communities. They do not want to leave. And last but not least, so this one is really important. I don't think that we always think about this, is remove the financial barriers for advancement. And so sometimes we're like, yep, the state says that for you to be in X, Y, and Z position, you have to have this credential or this background. For certain parts of our community, they don't financially have it. Doesn't mean they don't have the will or the skill to do it. Financially, they don't have it. And so we might be like, yeah, you need a master's degree to be able to get into these positions. That costs money. So if people don't have that, then they don't see their pathway within our district because they're like, I'm never going to be able to get that. So we want our leaders to think through, like, are there different ways to remove the financial burden? Are there stipends that you can give people so that they can participate in a development program? And usually we also say, like, then they will commit to a longer period of time with being in your district. So some of you might remember when you were New Leaders alum, right? You got the programming and training done, and then you committed to your district 3 to 5 years to get back. But that's some ways to think about how to take away the financial barrier. And I did not say this earlier, but if there's some place you want me to stop or you have a question, please feel free to do so. We're a small group, we can easily make that happen. Action 2, it examine and advance more equitable promotion practices. So we talked to district leaders, and here are some of the results that we heard from leaders. So there is a perceived representation gap between leaders and students they serve, a dedication to making progress, a perceived need for leadership opportunities and pathways, especially for aspiring leaders of color, and districts need support to increase their school leadership diversity. So we know leaders are thinking about this work all of the time. But on the next slide, we got to think about the ways to make this happen. And so we got to examine, like, what are the promotional activities that we do to help people grow? So what are the things that we need to identify and remove about advancement of educators of color, and the support the assistant principals of color and strengthen their leadership pipeline? So I want to give you an example. This might not be your district, but you might have in your district that X, Y, and Z population always goes into roles like the dean of students, or the behavior person, or they're the assistant principal over a behavior. That's great. But then your application process and your selection into your key roles in the district all are instructional focus. So that person is not equitable for them because they've been sitting in a role that has been very focused on SEL and behavior. They might not have had as much access to the instructional side. So when they have to go interview for that role, guess what? They don't do well and they don't get selected. And it's not because that person couldn't do well. It's just that the district has kind of pigeonholed certain types of people into certain types of role. They can handle those kids. And so what we really want to push is, are we being thoughtful about that? Is that a thing in our districts? And how do we counteract that if that is a situation that we do see certain people of color are in certain roles, and then our selection process doesn't allow them to show their greatness to us in the interview committee? So here, action 3, love to hear your thoughts around foster conditions that reduce turnover and retain school leaders of color. So you all are in leadership roles. You've all been a part of a diverse set of districts. And like July 21st, you hear like blank is leaving the district, like, oh my goodness. Or even for you, just thinking about like the work that you have to do and staying with your districts. Would love to hear you come off of mute and just talk about like what would make life better to not have school leaders leave their positions and reduce the amount of turnover. What are some things you've heard or seen that actually help for this?
Michelle, I've heard that some districts have models where principals cycle in and out of the principalship. So somewhat of like a emotional sabbatical where you may take a central office position And it also deepens your learning to be able to go back in, with a new lens. And so just giving principals an opportunity to just have a reprieve and do something different without feeling like they're stuck in this position. Like this is it. Once I get to the principalship, there are no other options for me.
Right. So then they get rejuvenated, they're excited, and guess what they want to do? Return back to their school. Because central office is not always that much more fun. Any other suggestions?
I
Or they
really like that. Yeah, Dana, that's like super, that's very innovative. I'd love to learn more about that. So I know that I've been working with a cohort of principals more so in like an affinity space. And I think that is also helpful too, just to provide the support and coaching within an affinity space for Black and Latinx leaders. And it has really increased their retention and just their engagement and satisfaction in the role.
Yeah, so I think it's so important that people feel like they have a community, whatever that community is. And so when they don't feel like they have that connection, they don't want to stay. But when you create those opportunities for them to get to know the other principal that's like all the way across town, but has similar population or a similar background, they're like, oh, they can like have conversations, they can connect with them offline and feel like they have someone that they can really connect to and also help them. So the next slide, we will kind of talk through just some of the other suggestions. So Melissa Kim from DCPS, saying being on the cusp of meaningful change and having your values amplified by your district is a motivator for leaders to stay. So one of the things that we have read in our literature and research is, if I know my district values me, I want to be here. So having an affinity group says you see me, you know what I need, and you allow me the opportunity to express myself, to have my hair down or my hair up, whichever way, and really be able to make those connections. Or you know that you value me so much that you are creating an opportunity that I get to step out of a role that is 24/7 and be able to do something that's very interesting and then come back into that role when I feel rejuvenated. But this piece around knowing your district values you as a person and everything that you bring actually helps leaders to stay. So here's a couple of things that New Leader says is, one, create those intentional support groups. So that was shared. Thank you, Lisa. Create systems that advance autonomy. So one of the things is when they feel like there's too many mandates, people don't feel like they have enough of their voice or their thinking to be able to express themselves. Provide professional development for distributed leadership. So how do you create the opportunity for them not to have to take on everything? So what are the different positions in their schools or ways that they can think about delegating some of the work? And then last but not least is providing them with tailored mentorship or job embedded coaching. Again, having someone that is coming to them and giving them the opportunity to express themselves and think through like what is going on also allows them to better show up because they have a person to talk to. Action 4 is implement more transparent and equitable recruitment and hiring practices. Next slide. There are not enough people in the country who want to be principals or prepared to be principals. We want to identify the right talent to fill these shoes. And Superintendent Kirby is actually talking in a different group. One of the things that we really want to unpack around this is that we have created structures and systems that don't always allow us to be able to identify the great leaders that we have in our community. And so we think about traditional ways that we recruit leaders, right? Or people into our school system. And we will say, we're going to post in a job ad, or we're going to go to, maybe we will say we'll go to an HBCU and create a partnership. But where are a lot of our people of color usually at on the weekends? Where are some places that they're usually at? Just share, where do you think there's groups of people of color mostly at?
Sorority and fraternity functions.
Yes, so they're sorority and fraternities. Like, how many of us do recruitments directly to those organizations? They literally were created for Black and brown people. And where do we like sit there and say, you know what, I'm just gonna go ahead and recruit out of there? What's another location that we know that people of color usually convene at and come together at over the weekends?
Church.
Church. Are we sitting there putting our ads in the church pamphlets? Are we on a Sunday going and talking about how great our district is and we're looking for the next great leader? Right? So we traditionally think about the places like, oh, I'm going to go to the college next door, but that Sunday school leader probably would be a great like teacher or intern or something like that. If we tap into that person right now, they're doing it every Sunday already. Or we talk to the fraternities or sororities, they all have youth groups. There's probably someone leading those youth groups. Have we tapped into them to think about coming into our districts and moving up the career ladder and having a bigger impact? No, we usually go to our traditional places where we think, oh, we're going to be able to recruit great leaders. But these, on the next slide, you will see they're already in our communities, right? So engaging with our community stakeholders to talk about advancement and what they need to advance. Provide training to hiring teams of best practices and to reduce bias in hiring decisions. So one of the things we talk through is helping districts to think about at your hiring tables, do you have mirrors and windows? Do you have someone that when they look across that table, when there's 15 people there, they go, somebody looks like me, right? It's so important. Studies show when someone feels like they have a person that's close to them, whether it's aid, whatever the thing is that they need, they feel more comfortable and can express themselves better. But we usually are selecting X, Y, and Z to be on our committees. We're not always thinking about what is the diversity of our interview panel and making sure it represents that community. The other reason why you want to think about the diversity of your hiring practices and your team is that translation. We all know when we're sitting and listening to someone who's very nervous, they might say colloquialisms or things that might not be like per se like an education terminology. But if I know that term, I'm like, oh, they mean this. I can translate for the other people on the panel. And that can give that person the points that they needed on the scoring rubric. But if there's no one that can do that connection piece, so I believe that they meant this. Here's my low inference data. Here's this comment they said, and that's what that means in this community. Then that person might not get through the job interview. And so you really want to pressure test, are we being equitable? Are we being reflective about our practices? And then the next part is establish a leadership tracking system. How many people know about a leadership tracking system? Do your districts have them? Well, since I hear silence, a leadership tracking systems is a great way for a district to be able to identify leaders in a variety of ways. So you might say, oh, I want to have a person with this background, with this knowledge, with these skills in my pool. But if you're not tracking in your system a variety of different types of characteristics, you're not going to be able to pull them. And so what we normally have is ApplyTrack or whatever system people apply to, but they don't always tag characteristics that you feel that you need, besides things like, oh, a bilingual person or a math person, things that are on their background. But you might realize through your data that people who live in this community or people who've had this type of experience as a teacher or a teacher leader are best to support schools in this way. A leadership tracking system will allow you to give people quote unquote badges so that you can then identify them faster. So then you'd be like, oh, this person has these other qualifying skills that are not just what you have on a resume. But first, you really think through like what makes a great leader in our district? What makes a great leader for this type of context school? What have we seen time and time again? And then you put in your leadership tracking system those characteristics so you can pull from a variety of systems to be able to identify those people and even put them into a principal pathway program or ask them to apply for the principalship. And last but not least, truly prioritize and measure school leader diversity. So, we are very data-driven in new leaders. You'll see on the next slide. We really want leaders and district leaders to really establish a school leader diversity as a priority and make sure to communicate that. So same way that we know when districts are looking for that STEM teacher or they're looking for a special ed teacher, there's so many announcements about it. But do you see that same type of energy and communication around we want diversity in our school leaders? Is there communications about that? And last but not least, conduct an audit and regular reviews of school leader diversity data. And so, of course, you have certain types of backgrounds that you probably are able to run, but then again, going deeper around the diversity that you're looking for in your district to say like, our kids look like this. Let's run the numbers to see if we have the same or close to the same percent of leaders that would represent our kids and what they need. And let's look at where we don't have that. And so are we being intentional for recruiting? Are we being intentional for looking for those leaders within our school system to make sure that they're in the pipeline and or apply into our systems? And so I will pause there to see if there are any questions or like speak to anything that you heard of that you say, yep, we do this in our district and this is what it looks like. So do you have any practices that you feel that you would like to share around hiring that make sure that you are thinking through biases that might be either in your selection process or in your interview process? Do you guys have that in your school system? And if you do, what does that look like?
I know in my last couple of years at us at Baltimore City Schools, Dr. Sandalises had a focus on recruiting and retaining Black teachers, actually. And so we had a Black teacher recruitment and retention work group. So we had several different sections of that work group. We looked at preparation. Some of the barriers were like we know teachers being able to pass the praxis, and creating those pipelines with paraeducators and things like that, or providing mentors and affinity groups for new teachers. And the district actually has been implementing those strategies and increasing the number of Black teachers, which, in a district that has predominantly Black students, it just made sense that the percentage of teachers of color did not match the demographic of students. So it really did make an impact when the superintendent made that a focus.
Great. And you actually use data to make sure that you identify what would be right supports, right? So if it was, oh, we're just going to keep recruiting, that actually would not have actually solved the problem.
No.
If the practice was the issue for them to pass it, right? And so creating that or creating the peer group to support them and make them keep on pushing through was the lever that actually provided that change. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Sure.
Anyone else want to share either a strategy or reflection about hiring or retention of leaders or teachers of color?
So here in our district, we are a majority minority district, primarily African American. Same with our students, but over the last 10 years, there's been, of course, an influx of the Latinx community. And we have not been able to close that gap of representation with teachers and definitely leaders. So we've made some small gains of recruiting Latinx teachers, but they're in such demand in the public sector, in the federal sector, like it is competition. So as soon as they finish the degree and they become certified, there's so many other industries that want the bilingual person that we can't compete. We can't compete financially, and they end up leaving the district, or they end up teaching foreign languages. And so they're not really there to support the scholars that really need to see them, as opposed to they're being stuck teaching foreign languages. And so our Latinx scholars don't have the representation that they need because we don't have teachers trained to teach foreign language. So there's a couple of complexities, but because we're here in the Washington, D.C. area, there are so many other job opportunities and businesses in the government that heavily recruit members of the Latinx community. So it's very challenging for us to retain them long enough to go into management.
Yeah, and so that was like a couple of things that we like spoke to, like identifying them and being able to support them, and then providing them into the right positions, right? And so if they're in X, Y, and Z position, then all the kids that truly need to see them does not happen. And so are there other training programs that we can provide them? And thinking young, since your school district is really starting to grow in the Latinx population, it's like, how are we tapping the kids to start believing and saying, I want to be a teacher, going back to Lisa's point earlier, and saying, I want to come back and teach here, right? And so like, what are we doing now, right? We have this population, they really can't go anywhere, they got to be with us. And how are we like getting them excited about going into the profession after they leave? Are there other types of opportunities? Are there scholarships that we might give to certain kids so that they go to college and then they come back to us to teach? Like, how are we thinking about all the different action steps that we talked about in the shoulder tap to really maximize all of the diversity that we do have and really keep them for these positions? We know that we're at time, and we're so grateful. What we're going to drop in the chat as I close out is the survey. And so that you can just give us some feedback about this session, and also to do another reminder to fill out your alumni survey. We're gonna keep hitting you with that many times. Remember to read your new leaders notes, and then visit our New Leaders Network online portal for resources. And if you ever need to reach out to us, you ladies know how to find us. You could always just send us an email. But in the chat, Jaiana dropped in the survey. But as we were closing, we were just noting that there are a variety of ways that districts are really trying to think about this work. And New Leaders is here to be able to provide those supports to you in a variety of ways, like working with your HR team or working with you all to identify, the next set of great leaders. And so thinking about our NAPF program might be a way to get people into that pipeline. Or you might say we need to start earlier and get those leaders into like being teacher leaders, or like how we used to have emerging leaders. So if you're thinking about like, what are the other ways that we can capitalize on the great diversity of our community, we would love to be able to support you in that work. So I just want to thank you so very much for coming out and attending our alumni town hall. We hope that you enjoyed. And we just really are grateful for the leadership that you guys provide every single day to our students across the country. So I'll be here to see if you have any questions or any feedback or any thoughts as we close out.